Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Christy. I am with Champaign County Master Gardeners Program Committee, and we organize and present these monthly educational programs for our local group. Tonight, we are very excited to have one of our own members here to share her expertise with you. Karen Pollard has been a Master Gardener since 2019. Those of you who are in the Champaign-Urbana area may be familiar with the vegetable section at the Idea Garden, which is our display garden here on the University of Illinois campus. Karen is the coordinator of that garden, which produces large amounts of vegetables that they share with local families in need. Karen's been winter sowing for more than 8 years. She started with vegetables, but now her gardens are expanding and she is moving into growing more native plants as part of her winter sowing. Tonight it is going to get below zero here in Champaign. So Karen, we are looking forward to some good news about how we can hurry spring forward for us. So everybody, please welcome Karen Pollard. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy.
You're welcome.
I'm not sure I can actually hurry spring, but I can tell you how to have some fun with your garden in winter. I'm really excited to talk about winter sowing tonight. It's been something that I've been doing for several years, and I found it to be very fun and very rewarding. And so I hope that everyone who's joined in tonight will give it a try and find their experience to be as good as mine has been. So jumping right into it, what is winter sowing? Winter sowing is a method of planting seeds outdoors during the winter months. It's an alternative really to starting your seeds inside under lights or by a window, or you can even, and you can do actually both. I start seeds both ways, but I do find the winter sowing to be just a great way to propagate plants. Seeds are planted in mini greenhouses, which are usually made of recycled materials. Milk jugs happen to be the most popular container choice, but there's other options as well. And then the seeds remain dormant in these little greenhouses until the conditions are right for them to germinate. And you're going to have different seed types with different requirements, different conditions that they need, but they all seem to do very well with this method of sowing. This term winter sowing was coined by Trudy Davidoff in 2003. And then in 2006, the USDA recognized winter sowing, defining it as a propagation method used throughout the winter where temperate climate seeds are sown into protective vented containers and placed outdoors to foster a naturally timed high percentage germination of climate tolerant seedlings. And I think the key here is really the protected vented containers. Winter sowing is not putting your seeds outside into the soil and then putting a protective cover on. That's a way of sowing seeds in the winter, but it's not winter sowing because you're going to have different temperatures with your soil that's on the ground out in nature versus the soil that is in your vented containers. Those container soils are going to freeze and thaw more often. And in the spring, as the weather warms, those container soils are going to be warmer, allowing for a earlier germination than seeds that are planted on the ground, even with a protective cover. This picture here was taken last year in February, and we had just gotten some snow, obviously, and I had just put out that tub of containers in the front of the picture. But if you look behind that, you'll see that there's a couple more rows of milk jugs that are kind of buried in the snow out there. So you'll see some other pictures of my gardens as we go along. But that was one I wanted to share because it's in the snow. So Tabitha, I'm ready for the next slide. So as Christy said, this is at least my 8th season of winter sowing. I haven't always kept track of my gardening pursuits. But going back through pictures, I know that it's at least my 8th season, if not more. In these slides, I describe the tools and the methods that I've used for winter sowing and what's worked for me. Over the years, I've had a lot of success growing plants with winter sowing. I've also had some failures, and I like to think that I've learned from both. And I know I still have a lot to learn. The more information that I find about winter sowing, the more I'm aware that that people do it in different ways. There's no real hard and fast rules to how you do it. And you really just need to kind of find out what works best for you and have fun with it. At the end of the presentation, I've included links for more information, more presentations and other online resources. And there's so much information out there. Don't get overwhelmed with it. Just, try it and see how it goes. Be willing to learn and to fail and to succeed. And as I said, the photos are ones I've taken over the years. And in this slide, I have a photo from March 4th of 2017. And if I ever knew I was going to share my photos, I probably would have cleaned things up a little bit. There's a broken terracotta pot there. So and then a month later, April 17th, you can see that a lot of those containers have germinated. There's plants growing in them. I went back today to look at what was actually in those containers on March 4th. And there were containers of borage, artichoke, broccoli, fennel, leeks, peas, and yarrow. And what you can't see in the photo is that the broccoli and the leeks have actually germinated. So by March 4th, there were plants that were getting ready to be able to be planted into the ground. And then the photo on March 17th, there's artichokes in the top container. There's some fennel. There's yarrow, and then there's broccoli that's germinated there. There's the other container that's there. There's a container, a strawberry container, and that one actually had ground cherries in it. So that's an alternate to using milk jugs. You can use containers like a strawberry container or a takeout container or lettuce container. And Tabitha, I'm ready for the next slide. So benefits of winter sowing. There's so many benefits really, but I think the easiest one that you could sell people on is how cost effective it is. There's really no limit to the number of plants that you can grow without the equipment and space required for indoor growing. You can grow your seeds densely within those containers and then separate out seedlings. So allowing for many plants from a single container. Overall, it's going to be less effort to do winter sowing of seedlings because they need less attention than those that you're going to grow indoors. So I'm probably not going to look at my winter sown containers until, beginning of March. Whereas if I'm growing stuff indoors, I'm really caring for those every day and making sure they've got water and lights and so on. You'll also be able to get earlier harvests if you plant vegetables. You can have vegetable plants ready for the garden weeks before they would germinate with direct sowing. This is really beneficial for plants that like it cool. And, in the Illinois weather, we don't always have a long spring. It sometimes seems like we go from cold to hot. So those plants that like it cool get a little bit more of a season if you winter sow them. Another great benefit is more diversity in the plants that you can grow. You can grow plants that aren't available in your local nurseries, which, be it vegetables or be it annual flowers or perennials or native plants. All of those things you can do with winter sowing that you might not have at your local garden centers. Another thing is healthier plants. The plants that you start inside have to be taken outside to be hardened off. And that can be, quite a process. They might need to go, for an hour at a time to 2 hours at a time. Whereas these winter sown plants, they're really tough and resilient right from the start. They're getting hardened off as they go. So there's no period really of hardening them off. I think this is really beneficial if you work, outside the home for 8 hours a day, and you might not have time to harden off your transplants. This is really good for being able to create healthy plants with minimal effort. Another thing for me that's a benefit is having a greater control interplanting and spacing my plants. I don't have to thin them once the seedlings are planted in the garden because they're already seedlings and not, seeds coming up all together. And then also from a design perspective, if I'm doing companion planting, I can very deliberately place my plants where I want them to go. A couple other benefits that aren't listed here. One is just the availability of plants that you'll have to share with your friends and neighbors. And that's, fun to be able to share plants. And then maybe, I don't know, depending on who you are, one of the best benefits is just the joy of being able to experience the germination process and the miracle of growing from a seed to a plant. So that's one of my favorite things about it. Well, they're all my favorite things. So winter sowing is just great. All right, Tabitha, do you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah, but real quick, Karen, we did
Yeah.
have a question come through, somebody that's new to winter sowing.
Okay.
They just want to make sure that they're understanding this correctly. If you winter sow outdoors, you do not need to do anything with them indoors, correct?
That is correct. They're actually, so those seeds that were shown on the slide with the March and April picture, those seeds were outside from probably mid-February on.
Okay.
And I'll talk about the timing of when you winter sow as well.
All right. And can you explain a little bit more about how not having to thin seedlings?
So what you're going to do is when you have your plants in the containers, you will separate them before you plant them in the garden, essentially. So you're not going to have, like in your vegetable garden, if you plant, a row of carrots, you may oversow and then have to go back later and thin those carrots out. You're really doing that before you plant. So there is, I guess, some thinning, but it's more separating than thinning, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Karen. I'll advance the slide.
Okay, thank you, Tabitha. So here's a list of the materials that you will need to do your winter sowing. And after I talk about how to winter sow, then I will go ahead and do a little demo. So you're going to need seeds, of course. You're going to need a recycled, clean plastic container that will serve as your greenhouse. These can be milk jugs, lettuce, takeout containers. The only rule is that these containers should let the sun in, so you need something that's translucent. You'll need something to put drainage holes in the containers. You can use a drill. You could use a utility knife or a hot glue gun. I use a heated screwdriver. I've just found that to be easier for me. You'll need scissors if you're using milk jugs, because you're going to cut around the milk jug to open it up to put your seeds in. You'll need a seed starter mix and either potting soil or compost. And it is completely fine to use 100% potting soil. You don't really need the seed starter mix. You probably want to use the seed starter mix if you're using compost, just because it's a little bit heavier. You'll want something to moisten the soil. You can pre-moisten it, or you can use a spray bottle or other means to moisten it once you get the soil in the container. You'll want to use a garden marker pen or an other outdoor type pen. You want to avoid permanent markers because those will wear off during the winter months. They will not remain permanent. I have, using the garden marker pen, my containers that I saved from last year still have the seed names on the outside, so they work really well. You'll want duct tape if you're using milk jugs. And then if you don't have a garden marker pen, or if you want to label on the inside, you'll need plant labels. So that's really optional. And then a tray for bottom watering. Again, that is optional. I like to use cookie sheets, but I also have trays that are a little bit deeper. So those are our materials, and I'm going to show you all of those after we go through the next few slides, which discuss how to do the winter sowing. So Tabitha, I think we're ready for the next one, unless you have.
Yeah, we do have a
anything
few more
asked.
questions. Somebody
Okay.
asked, where do you get a garden marker pen? I think you talk about that later, don't you?
Well, no, because I know I've ordered mine online. I know like some of the seed companies have them. And the garden marker pen I have is called, I'm looking at it, it's called Garden Marker. There are other brands, and you might even find you just need to find something that can be used outside.
It's not going to wash away.
It's not going to wash away. And if you're worried about it washing away, then you can put plant labels on the inside.
That's a good idea. One question came through, how do you heat the screwdriver?
I heat the screwdriver on my stove. So I have a gas stove, and I just heat it up and punch the holes through. If I had a better drill, I would probably use it. But
okay.
I always feel like my drill crushes my containers. So.
And then are clear plastic containers too transparent to use?
No, you could use, no, clear is fine. Yep.
And then one last question, Karen. Somebody asked, how do the seeds not die if you sow them in winter? And are you going to talk more about what cold stratification is and how it's possible? It's not possible for all types of seeds.
I am going to talk about.
Okay.
Yeah, I am going to talk about that. But really the seeds, there are people that put their seeds out, all of their seeds in winter, do the winter sowing in January. And those seeds don't die. It's really the seeds, if a seed starts to germinate and then gets to a condition that will kill it, then it will die. But the seeds themselves, until they start to germinate, they're going to be fine in the cold.
All right, thanks, Karen.
You're welcome.
Do the next one.
Okay, so I have 4 slides on how to do the winter sowing. The first thing you'll do is you'll prepare your containers by putting the drainage holes in the bottom, and maybe a few holes on top. If you're using a milk jug, you've already got the top, which is your vent. You do not use the top in the milk jug. You take that off and throw it away. You can use just that, or you can put in a few more air holes. If you are using a other type of container, like a lettuce container or a takeout container, you're going to definitely need to put holes on the top and for the ventilation, and then your holes on the bottom for drainage. As I mentioned, I use a screwdriver that I heat up on my gas stove and melt the holes in the containers. I think, try what you have. A utility knife could work great. A hot glue gun could work great. I think it's just a matter of figuring out what works best for you to get those holes put in. Then the next thing you'll do in preparing your container is, if you're using a milk jug, you're going to cut around the center of the milk jug, leaving the handle connected so you have a hinge. And this opens, you'll use it to open and close the container. I like to include a hole in the side of the milk jug, so it provides me a good starting point for making that cut around the center. And then we can go to the next slide. So the next thing you're going to do is add the soil to your container. I have been adding about 2/3 potting soil or compost to the bottom, and then I put in about a third seed starter mix on top of that for about 3 to 4 inches of soil. If you're using lettuce containers or takeout containers, there's not going to be as much room for this soil and for the plant growth. So for those containers, those types of containers, I usually put plants that I'm going to germinate very soon after. I'm going to transplant very soon after germination. And again, if you can use potting soil, 100% potting soil is absolutely fine. If you're using compost, you'll want to make sure that your compost is weed-free, seed-free, so that you don't have other seeds coming up in the containers competing with your winter sown seeds. So locally, I would get my compost from the Landscape Recycling Center because I know it's going to have fewer, I have not had problems with it having weed seeds in it, whereas my compost always has some seeds that come up in it. You're going to want to have that planting medium fairly moist, so you can water. You can get the planting medium wet beforehand, or you can do it after you've got the seeds in. I usually spray my seeds in with the spray bottle just to give them a gentle watering once they're planted, and then before that, getting the soil wet. And then you want to plant the seeds according to the recommended depth. You can plant them densely, and then you can separate them when you're ready to plant them into the garden. So in this photo here are seeds from some zinnia that I saved last year. And I really put those in pretty densely into this container. And I brought that container with me tonight with the germinated seeds, so you can see how I separate those out. But if you can, I think you can probably tell that there's a lot of seeds in there. They're very close together. I'm ready for the next slide.
Okay. Couple questions came through.
Okay.
How deep should the bottom part of the container be?
So you're going to need, well, you're going to have, 3 or 4 inches of soil. And I think I probably have, like maybe a little bit more than, the hinge is where you cut for the hinge is going to be above that.
Okay. And then just to be clear, this is potting mix, not garden soil.
Yes, thank you. Potting mix. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
That seems to kind of be the only rule that you hear about, is that don't use your garden soil, so yeah. So how to sow, part 3. Typically, you're going to plant one seed variety in a container, and this shows some milk jugs in these photos. If you're planting more than one seed variety, I use cardboard to divide up the containers into sections. If you do this, it allows you to have some more variety in your containers and use less containers overall. But you want to consider the seed and the plant requirements if you're sowing more than one variety per container. You'll want them to germinate and be ready to transplant about the same time. So in one of the photos, I have some basil that was sown in mid-April. The photo was taken on May 1st. So I have a purple basil and then some kind of green basil. And you can see those were pretty densely sown. And then on the right, there's some tomato seeds, a couple of varieties. So again, I've used the cardboard to separate the container into sections so I could grow more than one variety of tomato at a time. And in that one on the right, that tomato one, it looks like I've probably already removed tomatoes from there to transplant them into the garden. And those tomatoes would have been, they're about a month and a half old in that photo. And then I'm ready for the next slide. Okay, so finally, once you've got your seeds in and you've got your label on your container, you will use duct tape if you're using a milk jug to close the container. Some people put the duct tape all the way around. I find that maybe just a couple strips closing 2 sides works well. I think it makes it easier to open it later on once the seeds are germinated. But this again is a personal preference, really. One of the first rules other than not using garden soil is to make sure you do not leave that milk jug cap on. That's providing your ventilation. So just toss that out. And then if you're labeling, again, using a garden marker is going to be more permanent than a permanent marker, which will wear off most likely by the time that you're ready to plant your seeds. You can also put the plant labels inside, especially if you're dividing up into different sections. You'll want to have the labels inside. And then I will put my containers onto a tray of some sort and put some water in it so that they can bottom water throughout the spring and winter when it's not frozen. And then I just put them on my driveway in a place that gets about half a day of sun. And so that's kind of how to sow in a nutshell. And now I'm going to switch over to show you a demo of how this gets done. All right, so I have all the materials here required to do winter sowing. I have seeds. So tonight I have butterfly milkweed seeds, and I have butterfly milkweed seeds. I have some that I from my yard that I took the seed pods off last fall. So I'm going to sow both of those in one container and then put a divider in it so I can see which one worked better. I have the recycled container, which I've already put the holes in using my screwdriver, which I don't know if you can tell, but the end of it is very blackened by all of the heat that it's gotten from the stove. And then in the bottom of the milk jug, I have about probably 6 holes that have been pushed through. And then I've done some on the top as well along the sides. But again, you don't have to do the ones on the sides. It's optional. It will germinate fine either way. And then I have the one on the side where I'm going to use the scissors to cut around it. So I also have my scissors, and then I have the compost and the seed starter mix. This is the garden marker, and it just says garden marker. There's other varieties as well. I know like Amazon has this, Johnny's has this, maybe your local nurseries will have it. You can also, if that doesn't work, I think in craft stores, they will have markers that will be permanent for outside use. They just won't be called garden markers. I also have duct tape tonight, and I brought plant labels so that I would know which plant was from my yard and which plant came from the seed packet. And then this is the divider that I'm going to use. And then here's my cookie sheet, which is what I can use for bottom watering. So if you have old cookie sheets, or you can go to Goodwill and get some old cookie sheets. Cookie sheets are nice for bottom watering because they're not super deep. So if you get a heavy rain, it won't flood your containers out. So I'm going to cut around the milk jug where I put that hinge, or put that hole for the hinge. And then I'm going to leave, I don't know, maybe like an inch for the hinge. And you can see that now I can open it up and close it. And then I'm ready to put in the compost. I also put a little mark here, so it's 3.5. So that's about 3.5 inches. So that's kind of where I'm going to target to put the soil. But again, it's not a hard and fast rule. So I'm going to dump some in there. Actually, it looks like more than 3.5 to me, but a little more. I'm not going to go to that 3.5. It's that's the compost. I did bring my water bottle too, my spray bottle. So I'm going to water that in because I did not pre-water it. So, and then I'm going to put my divider in. Probably would have been easier if I'd done that at the start, but that's fine. So you can see that I've just kind of laid that piece of cardboard in there to divide it up. And I'm going to put a little bit of the seed starter mix on it. The seed starter mix is good for really small seeds that need to be lightly covered, which I think, most potting soils are probably fine for that too, but this is a very fine mix. And then I'm going to put some seeds in. So these seeds are, I don't know what they call it when are they pelleted? They're purple. We've got like a purple coating. So I'm going to I don't know if you can see, I've put purple seeds in there, somewhat densely sown, not super densely sown. And then I'm gonna put the seeds from my yard on the other side. There's part of the milkweed. All right, so it's harder to see, but those are also pretty densely sown in there. I don't think you can probably see that, but you can see the purple ones. And then I'm going to cover it. It said about 1/8 inch of soil on top. So I'm just going to put about 1/8 inch. I'm not going to measure it. I'm just going to put the soil on top, and then I'm going to water those in. And before we started, I did put the name of the seed on the outside, so the butterfly milkweed. And now I'm going to put these on the labels on the inside, so I know which one it is. I'm going to put a little bit more soil. I see one of those popping up. And then I'm just going to water it in with the sprayer. Tabitha, if there's any questions, I can answer them while I'm spraying.
Yeah, there are quite a few actually. Can you clarify the difference between the soilless seed starting mix versus potting soil?
So normally seed starting mix is used like inside, and I think it's usually sterile. So that's why I think that's the difference between really a seed starting mix and potting soil. So is the fact that it's sterile. So I don't know, I don't think you really need it for your outdoor sown seeds. It is really light. It has no nutrition for the seeds once they germinate. So that's another reason for putting potting soil or compost and not just using the seed starter mix. The seed starter mix is sterile, but it has no nutrients for the plant. So that compost that you put in there or the potting soil is going to provide nutrients to the seedlings once they start growing.
All right, thanks. I'm going to scroll up just a little bit because we've had quite a few questions come through. Is it beneficial to use this process if you have a hoop house? Or if you have a hoop house, is this not necessary?
you can do a lot more plants with this process. I mean, in a hoop house, I guess it depends how big your hoop house is, really. Sometimes, like if I were going to germinate, if I were going to do winter sowing of tomato plants, I might, once they germinate, put them into, larger containers, like a, 4-inch pot or something, and then put that like into a hoop house, just to like sit it in there, but not plant it out. I think as far as like germination, I think that if you're growing, like cold hardy annuals or vegetables, I think they will germinate faster in the milk jugs than they will in the hoop house. So if you have broccoli or something, or you have cauliflower and you have it germinated, on March 5th, maybe it's too early to put it out in the garden, but you could then put those into the hoop house. Whereas I'm not sure your hoop house you would get a germination that early, because the soil in the hoop house is attached to the soil in the ground, which is colder than the soil in the containers.
All right. Excuse me. Let's see. Lots of questions. I'm curious about what happens with tomato seedlings if and when there's a frost.
So, and I was going to get into that, but if you are growing tomato seedlings and say you put them out at the beginning of March and they're germinated by mid-March, you would want to cover those, because the tender annuals, once they are germinated, they will be killed by a frost. Or they could be killed by a frost. I mean, if they're in the containers and say it gets down to 28, you'd probably be okay, because you had the containers will have absorbed heat during the day. I mean, if it's a warmer day, but I guess I would cover them because I wouldn't want to risk losing my tomatoes.
Okay. Let's see. How many
So I didn't do a great job with the tape, but I've taped it on 3 sides because I use shorter ones. So I've left some additional venting basically on the sides as well. And just as a note on the butterfly milkweed, I did check the seeds require 30 days of cold stratification, which is kind of cold moist treatment. So as long as you keep it moist and outside for 30 days, then after that 30 days, at some point they should germinate if they're viable seeds, which they should be. So,
all right, and can you clarify what would you cover the tomatoes with?
I would cover them with like a tarp or a plastic sheet, or even like a indoor sheet. I mean, if it's not going to get really cold. I mean, hopefully by the time that you winter sow tomatoes, which I'm going to talk about, your outdoor temperatures are not going to be getting down to really extreme lows, maybe in the 20s, but hopefully they're not going to get colder than that.
Okay. And then do you need to water throughout the winter, or is the rain and snow enough?
I do try to check and make sure that the containers get enough moisture. I mean, right now I've got a bunch on my driveway that are frozen to the tray. And I mean, I can't even like lift them off the tray to see if they're heavy. Like this one, I can tell this one's good because it's not super light. But you will want to make sure, like if it's been dry and you haven't had any snow or rain, you will want to monitor the moisture in your containers, because you don't want them to dry out, especially ones that need stratification or that cold moist period.
Yeah, and a good segue into that. Somebody asked, but native seeds could go out in February and left in the jugs until planting. Correct.
Yeah.
And yeah, do you want to, or maybe you're going to talk a little bit about how natives need that dormancy period, and that's why.
Yeah, I am
Cool.
going to cover that too.
Okay.
Yeah. So if there's no more questions about the kind of the how-to, then, oh, I do have one other, I brought a salad container. I did not put holes in it, but, so if I were gonna use this container, I would put, like half of it filled with soil. And then I would, so it's it'd be pretty shallow from a soil perspective and also a, plant perspective. So I would use this for something, like maybe like sweet alyssum that I would sow. And then once it germinates, it'd pretty quickly go into the garden. And then it would have, I'd put the holes in it as well.
All right. We ready to go back to the presentation?
Yep. Okay. All right. So when to sow. So we've covered the what, the why, and the how, and now kind of now we get into like when you're going to do this. And so for my winter sowing, I like to categorize my seeds into 3 groups according to their general growing needs. So I have my native plants, I have my cold hardy annuals, and perennials that don't require a cold period. And then I have my tender annuals. So those are sort of the 3 categories that I use when I'm considering when I'm going to put my seeds outside. For native plants, you can really sow those anytime from about mid-December to late January, and even into February and March, depending on, what the seed is. So like for this butterfly milkweed, I could probably put that out in, mid-February, and it would probably be fine because it's going to be cold until mid-March. So it would have the 30 days of cold stratification. So, and that's the thing about native plants, or native seeds, is a lot of them need a period of cold temperature, cold moist temperature, which is called stratification, in order to germinate. And these, as I said, can go out as early as mid-December. For the natives, the container covers are protecting the seeds from the wind, from the squirrels, from other wildlife. But those container covers are not really benefiting or preventing your seeds from germinating. They would germinate fine without the covers. And that's another reason why I just go ahead and, I don't seal them really tight, and I add those extra ventilation spots on the top, because for native seeds, they benefit from the cold weather. The other thing that happens within the winter sowing containers, which is beneficial for your native plants, is the freeze and the thaw cycles that these seeds go through in the containers, because that provides what's called scarification, which breaks down the seeds that have a seed coating that needs to be broken down. So sometimes you'll have a seed that says to file it before you sow it, or maybe to soak it before you sow it. And those are some methods that you can use for scarification. But for this process of winter sowing, that's going to happen naturally with the freeze and thaw that occurs in the containers. Generally, your seed packets will have germination requirements. And again, this should be possible to sow native seeds into February and March. You just have to look at what it says to the number of days that it needs stratification, or what the special requirements are of the seeds. I've included a picture of a packet of a yellow coneflower there, and it may be hard to see, but there's a germination code sort of on the bottom half, and it says C30, which means for that yellow coneflower, that plant or that seed needs 30 days of moist, wet, or moist, cold period outside in order to germinate. It doesn't mean that after 30 days, it's going to be germinated. It may still take longer, but it does require that number of days in order to consider germinating, if you will. And if you have seeds, you know, like that somebody's given you or you've gotten from your yard, you can go online and you can look for those requirements at some of the native seed sellers. So this is from Prairie Moon Nursery. If you wanted to find out the needs of your butterfly weed, you could go online and look at what they have and find out those conditions. So that's, you know, if you haven't purchased the seed and it's been given to you, you can still figure out what its requirements are essentially. And then we have cold hardy plants. These I will sow from mid-February to mid-March. Really mid-February is when I would like to get these done because I want to start putting them out in the garden in mid-March. These are frost tolerant annuals for the most part that can be sown in the garden starting in mid to late March, you know, several weeks before the last frost date. And these are going to be fast growing. So typically after they germinate, you're going to be ready to put them in the garden. You can also put into this category non-native perennials and natives that don't require a long period of stratification. Those can be sown, you know, mid-February to mid-March, and you will still have, you know, those non-native perennials ready to put in the garden in late spring. Some people do their winter sowing all at one time. They do it like in the middle of December or beginning of January, or, you know, sometime in January. I avoid doing that now with these cold hardy plants, because if you have an extreme frost or extreme freeze, as I said, the dormant seeds are not going to be harmed by the extreme cold, but if germination has started, an extreme freeze can permanently stop the germination process and kill the seedling. And it might not even be something that you really see because the seed might not have come out of the soil yet. I think it was 2 years ago in February of 2020, I had done my winter sowing at the beginning of February for peas and some other things. And the temperatures at that beginning of February were around 60. And then for a week, there were highs above freezing. Well, then on February 12th, we had a low of -6. I looked it up today because I knew it was cold, but I couldn't remember how cold. And that was the only time I had a winter sown jug of peas that didn't germinate. And so I believe that they had started that germination process, and then that sub-zero temperature just killed them. So that's why I now do and I will check too, if I'm in mid-February, if I see that it's going to be, you know, -2 in a week, I would wait to sow those seeds for another week, just to try to be safe with those. If you have a seed packet that indicates the plant's frost tolerant or that the seeds can be sown in early spring, those are the seeds that are going to fall into those cold hardy plants. And that's all I had on that one, Tabitha. And then the last category is tender annuals, and these I sow from early March to late April. These are going to be annuals that you would plant in the garden after the last chance of frost. So from, you know, late April, depending on how brave you are, until early May. Our average last freeze is April 17th. But the last 2 years, we've had these weird freezes in May. So that's just something to consider, I guess, in general with planting these types of plants. But if you have containers with germinated tender seedlings, you will need to protect those when the temperatures go below freezing. You could also consider, if you want to use the winter sowing for tender annuals, if they are seeds that grow quickly into plants, so like your cucumbers, melons, and squash, you probably don't even need to winter sow those until maybe April, because by end of April, you'll have, big plants ready for the garden. Slower growing annuals like your tomatoes and your peppers and eggplants, they might not get such a great jump start from winter sowing, but they can absolutely be done with winter sowing. They just take longer to get to a point where they're nice and big like they are at a nursery. And if you're growing them inside, you have the process of hardening them off. This does save you from having to harden them off. And because they're so hardy, they do catch up, I think, to most of your plants started indoors. And then that's all on when to sow your tender annuals. You can also continue to sow things into May if you have like seeds that, if you're doing this for design or you're doing this, to be able to control where your things go, you can continue to sow these tender annuals, later in the season. In this picture, so somebody asked about what do you cover your containers with, and you see I have that big plastic sheet there that I've kind of used for a hoop house too, but that's what I used one year for covering my containers of tender annuals. You can also, if you have them on a tray, you can kind of bring them into your garage, but if it's a tender annual, you're going to want to make sure it's protected. So while you're waiting for your seedlings, probably the only thing you really have to be concerned with is the moisture control, because your tiny greenhouses, whether they're, natives or whether they're, hard, whatever type of seed they are, they do need to be kept moist. And that's why I like to keep the bottom tray to make sure that they don't dry out. You can also top water, but if you do that, you just want to be careful that you don't disturb the seeds with, like a strong flow of water. So you just want to be careful. You could even, take a spray bottle and spray into the containers. You just might not get it might take you a little longer to do that than if you are using a bottom watering. If you have a tightly sealed container and just have the milk jug, just the vent on top, then you'll probably notice condensation in the containers on days above 32. If you've got good moisture, that's a good indicator. If you have more venting, if you have more holes on top, or if you don't have a, solid row of duct tape around, you may not notice the condensation as much. It's not something I particularly notice on mine. And I know that they're still have plenty of moisture. I can tell just by the weight of them. So just on hot days, your containers can dry out quickly. In a heavy rain, if you've got them on a tray, you can kind of, can give them too much water maybe. So just keep an eye on the weather and make, adjustments as necessary. But typically this period of waiting for seedlings is not a lot of work. And as I said earlier, I had, on March 4th of 2017, I had leeks growing and, probably in broccoli growing and probably peas. So they will, once the weather starts warming up a little bit, you are going to get germination. Next slide, please. And then once they have germinated, you're going to want to, as the temperatures allow, take your containers lids off during the day. So just kind of undo the duct tape and open them up and, let them get that wind and that, that, I guess that, natural environment. And that's going to toughen them up more. And it's also going to protect them if it's really hot. If it gets really warm, you want to make sure that you've taken off those containers, because it is going to be warmer inside the container than it is on the outside. With the densely sown seeds, when you have at least one set of true leaves, it's going to be time to start thinking about transplanting the seeds into the garden or into a larger container if you don't want to put them into the garden right away. If they're densely planted, they are going to need to be moved earlier than if you put seed between or space between the seeds. And then with your seedlings, there's sort of two methods that you can use. One is called the hunk of seedlings method, HOS. And with that, you're going to divide your seedlings into clumps. So the clumps, then they get planted into the garden. Whichever plant within that clump is the strongest, in theory, is the one that's going to survive. I've always transplanted the individual plants, and I just take the container and, toss it into my hand upside down. And then I remove that block of seedlings and separate them into individual plants. And I'm going to show you with a demo in a minute how this is done. Next slide, Tabitha. When you're transplanting the seedlings into the garden, look at the forecast, because it's going to be easier to be successful with your seedlings if it's a cool week or cool day, and you have some rain in the forecast, because these are going to need a little bit of attention to get established. And so that's just something to consider. One of the great things about the cold hardy plants is that they typically get the conditions that they need in the early spring, because it's cool. They like the cool, and we normally have more rain at that time. So they benefit from the spring rains when they're becoming established. As I said earlier, the native plants don't need protection from cold weather, but they tend to grow more slowly. So in the past, what I've done is once they germinate and get, a couple leaves, get a little bit bigger, I usually transplant them into 4-inch pots. And then I plant them out into the garden in the fall. So give them a chance to kind of grow a little bit before planting them out. As I said, if you've got tender annual seedlings, you're going to need to cover them after germination if your temperatures go below freezing. And if that seems like too much work, then you can sow the seeds in April instead of March. And then hopefully you're not going to have as freezing weather then. And if you do, it will be maybe upper 20s, and you won't have to really worry about the containers as much. The only downside really to waiting with tender annuals is that the plants will be smaller when it's time to go into the garden. When you're waiting to transplant to the garden, and this is really for like your native plants, probably more than any others, if they're shade plants, you want to move them out of the sun shortly after germination and just kind of care for them in an area that meets their requirements for the plant. And then I think that was the last germination one. And then I have a demo. Okay. So I brought tonight, these are not winter sown, they are sown inside. I have some arugula, and it was very densely sown. And then I have those zinnias that I mentioned, I showed a picture of earlier, that were also densely sown. And just to give you an idea of the different methods, as I said, I always separate my individual seedlings. And so I'm just going to take that out, and then you see that they do have roots, but because this zinnia just has one set of true leaves, the roots aren't, it's super densely formed. So it's pretty easy to just gently separate them into individual seedlings. And so that's what I typically do. It's just, very gently give them a tug. You're not really separate. You're really, for the most part, keeping their roots intact. And then, so if this were if this were like end of April, I would just go ahead and put these directly into the garden. So this other method, the hunk of seed method, I think I'm just going to dump this one out, but I think, normally somebody would probably cut the container. This one, these were grown earlier, so they are more densely cut, joined together. So for that, I'm just going to, following this hunk of seedlings method, I'm just going to cut this into chunks. So with this hunk of seedlings method, you would just take, several that you've cut within the same grouping and just plant that into the ground, and the strongest plant wins. So I don't think that would work really well for something like beets or root vegetables, but that is a method that a lot of people use. And then if you are transplanting, like say tomatoes or something, you can use 4-inch pots. Just make sure that if you're reusing that you clean them out. Usually it's 10% solution of water and bleach. And then the other thing to show you here is this is called a container, and these are used for, people use these for native plants because the native plants will grow typically a deep root, even though the top of the plant might not be small. So this is just something that I'm trying out this year because I'll be able to do more native plants than I normally can with my 4-inch pots. So Tabitha, are there any questions before I go on? I know we're getting late.
Just that somebody asked if there were hardy annuals that you can start earlier. Somebody in the chat box just mentioned that you can. There are some that you can start.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk about some of the different things that I've started like over the last year or two.
Okay, I think that's pretty much it for questions, Karen.
Oh, I see one. Don't understand how you use containers. So if I were using if this was a native plant and I was using the container, so as I said, I don't usually put my native plants out until fall. So if this was a native plant, I would, put the soil in and I would plant this in the container. And then there's actually a tray that it sits in. And it, it allows its roots to get really big, even though the top of the plant's not going to grow quite as fast. And it, just allows me to have more space for my native plants. Okay, so we'll switch back. All right, so I think that if there's something you want to grow, I think, winter sowing works great. Some people don't sow certain plants, but I think that if you go onto Facebook and find a winter sowing group, you're going to find somebody that has winter sown a plant that you want to sow. So just, and even, if you try some inside, try some outside, see which does better. But it is a great method. So try it if you have something you want to germinate. So at this point, you might be considering lots of seed varieties to winter sow. In case you're short on ideas, I've included some slides with the seeds that I winter sowed either last year or the year before. I have a vegetable garden. I like to grow vegetables, but I also like to plant my vegetables outside my vegetable garden, kind of in my front yard or different places. And I also like to plant I like to plant herbs and beneficial flowers or pollinator flowers, annuals that pull in pollinators as well as beneficial insects. So I like to grow lots of different kinds of annuals, but then the last several years, I've been replacing areas of my lawn with plants with a focus on the native plants. So I don't have a list of perennials to show you because I don't winter sow very many non-native perennials. All right, I'm ready for the next one, Tabitha. So the list to the right are the native plants that I successfully grew the last 2 years. As I said there, I do have failures. Last year I tried to grow marsh marigold. And the year before that, I tried to grow wild geranium, and neither one of those did germinate for me. But I have learned that there are seeds that can take more than 1 year to germinate. And I heard this on a podcast recently that ramps or wild onions are one of those. And they were another failure of mine. So I kind of wish I'd kept them maybe for another year to see if they would have worked. So this photo is an area of lawn that I replaced with some of these native plants. And I'm not going to go through the list, but I think as far as like native plant varieties and just satisfaction in growing them, being able to grow a shrub or a tree, I really find I find that to be really exciting. 2 years ago, I grew wafer ash trees from seeds I got from an online native seed nursery. And I don't know, like they're small, but you know, it was just a real joy to be able to grow those on my own. So we can go on to the next slide. I'll have some examples of cold hardy annuals. These are all ones that I grew last year. And as I said, cold hardy annuals I do very well with. I had that pea failure a couple of years ago. And so now I, try to wait until like mid-February to sow them. This year I'm going to try cauliflower, poppies, and snapdragons as well. Typically I don't winter sow greens or carrots, but those are things that I could try. Last year I did beets and was very successful with the beets. I liked that I was able to, put them exactly where I wanted them and didn't have to go back and thin them. So just like the zinnias that I showed you, I just separated them out when they were very small and put them into the garden. So I like the winter sowing not only provides me earlier cold hardy annuals, but it also provides me the flexibility to interplant them together and have a design that I want. So, and this is one of the things I really like sweet alyssum with, leeks or with Swiss chard. I kind of like sweet alyssum with just about everything in the vegetable garden. So we can go on to the next slide. And then finally, tender annuals. I also used this method last year for a lot of tender annuals. I had a more extensive indoor lighting. I had like 5 indoor lights or 5 shells of indoor lights. So I did my tomatoes and eggplants and peppers all indoors last year. But you can do those, as I said, outside too. I've done tomatoes outside and they've been great. You might not have your first tomato in, early July. You might have to wait till the end of July, but they can definitely be done with winter sowing. To get the tender annuals to germinate a little bit faster, if you want to, you could, minimize the number of vents. So instead of putting, as I said, not putting the duct tape all the way around your container and only having that milk jug lid opening, I think that you should be able to get them to germinate a little bit faster because you're going to have your container is going to warm up for you more during the day. So that's kind of it for the tender annuals. The melons, the squash, the cucurbit family, they really will germinate quickly and get big fast. So if you are going to winter sow those, I would kind of wait until you're ready to, close to when you're ready to put them in the ground. Because even if you're above freezing, a lot of those tender annuals really like the soil a little bit warmer. So even though you're not freezing, it might still be, a little bit cold for them if they germinate, in mid-April. So that's kind of it for the tender annuals. And then I think next, Tabitha, I just have some tips, just some things I was thinking about as I was going through this. When you're deciding on how dense you're going to put your seeds, consider how soon after they germinate that you plan to transplant them. You can sow them more densely if you're going to transplant them right away, and then maybe further apart if you want to let them get bigger in the container. So if you have tomatoes that you want to do and you're going to, really seal up that container so they can get as warm as possible and germinate as early as they can, maybe you'll, put fewer tomatoes in there so that you can use that container to let them get bigger. And so that you don't have to transplant them into the next size pot right away. You also consider how many plants you want to end up with. I mean, if you don't want 100 plants, you don't plant 100 seeds, because you're really going to have a high germination rate with this method. So you are going to see most of your seeds germinating. So don't oversow because you don't think they're going to germinate. They will germinate. Once you are, if you're planting very small seedlings, you can use like a row cover or fabric store tool or some other kind of mesh net fabric to kind of help protect your seeds from, wildlife until their root systems are established. Or you can also make, I make a lot of homemade chicken wire cloches. There's one in the photo there. I spray painted it. And that can just kind of help keep your seedlings safe and your established plants safe from becoming rabbit food. So something else to consider once they're, out in the garden, are they going to be safe? Your winter sown seedlings might need a little more attention than direct sown right after transplanting, just because, they're going from an ideal environment where they have all the water they need into, their shallow roots, an environment where they might not be getting as much water. And so that's just, if there's not a lot of spring rains, you are going to need to water them until they get established. Last year, I know was more challenging for the cold hardy plants because we had fewer spring rains than normal. And then I would say just, start with a few containers to get the feel of the process. If you're already sowing seeds indoors, try some of the same ones outdoors and see what you like better. So those are, tips I had. And then I have some additional resources, as well as on the next screen, some, oh, I have a picture. So these were from 2 years ago. These were some of my natives that I had, put in the 4-inch pots after they germinated. And so the picture on the left was probably, like maybe mid-June-ish timeframe. And then, probably the one on the right is a couple months later. So they do grow pretty slowly. So I just kind of kept them babied until fall and then planted them all out in the garden. So I put some seed sources here. The Urbana Free Library is where I got my butterfly weed seeds, the package, the Livingston seed package. They have a seed swap or free seed catalog there. I was able to get about 20 different varieties of seed there last year. So that's something to check on. Then for perennial flower seeds, Swallowtail Garden Seeds has a nice variety of perennial flower seeds. Those would be your seeds that you're going to, want to plant in probably mid-February to mid-March. As far as vegetables and annual flowers, I use Baker Creek or High Mowing or Seed Savers Exchange. And then Prairie Moon Nursery is a source I use for native plant seeds. And they're also a good source for if you have native plant seeds that you've collected from your yard or somebody has given you, you'll be able to go on and see what the seed requirements are for germination on their website. And then just some additional resources. I found that there were some other extension offices that did some presentations on winter sowing. There's actually a University of Illinois one too. So those 3 are links to those if you're interested. And then on the next slide, I have this Kevin Jacob, I think his blog is called A Garden for the House. And he was my first introduction to winter sowing, many years ago. So I included his link there as well. And he has different seeds that he recommends for winter sowing and he also kind of breaks it up into early and late. And then if you really want to get overwhelmed by all the information out there on winter sowing, then go to Facebook and join the Winter Sowers group. Trudy Davidoff, who coined the term winter sowing, is the administrator, and it's a very active group. There are many posts per day and winter sowers of all levels of experience. If you have any questions, it's a great resource. There's many people there that would love to answer questions. They have over 60,000 followers. And then you're also welcome to reach out to me too. My email address is on the first slide.
Karen, thank you again. It was excellent.
Thank you.